Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We've got a brand new interview from Lewis Mosley, the head of Palantir in the UK, who just sat down with Bloomberg for about 7 minutes and discussed a lot of interesting things. Some of the key takeaways from this interview are going to be how he responds, in particular his body language and his demeanor when asked about the NHS, how he responds to Palantir being this evil spy company, and overall how he talks about Palantir's progress in the United Kingdom and why they see that country as a major source of their economic growth and potential. So this is a good interview. We're going to get right into it. I saw a little bit of it this morning. I got through about 3 minutes of it, didn't see the back half of the other 4 minutes. And in those 3 minutes, it broke on the morning live stream that I was doing with the people who came. And the questions he was asked about the NHS and just the way he responded to it was really unique, and it's going to be fun to watch. This comes a day after Palantir got a $31 million contract to transition a bunch of data into the NHS's new federated data platform. A lot of people think that Palantir is the frontrunner to win the $611 million NHS overall contract. So this is unique timing for the interview because it comes a day after a major contract. And the way he answers these questions are just super interesting to take a look at. So let's get into it right now. Here's Lewis Mosley, head of Palantir UK, speaking, and he's also going to speak about defense spending, which was kind of the point of this interview, specifically in Europe.
Let's start then with that decision. Why choose the UK?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me. 3 reasons. First, talent. The UK is a world-class destination for AI talent. Brilliant universities, fantastic people coming out of those, but also a magnet for global talent, and I think really only second to the US. Second is this evolving, as you mentioned, approach to AI regulation. I think the direction of travel there is very promising. And third, for us, actually, this is really a natural evolution. It's a well-kept secret, but we've had a very large presence here in the UK for over a decade, nearly 1,000 engineers based here, and we do much of the core research and development for our other software here in the UK.
Now, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, even I didn't know they had 1,000 people, like 1,000 technical engineers working in the United Kingdom. It only makes sense that they made the UK their headquarters for AI development and R&D. I kind of believe him when he says a lot of progress on Palantir's products have been done in the UK, because when you have 1,000 engineers working on it, that means a lot. Now, I'm sure a lot is getting done in California and New York and Colorado, but still, the UK is a really, really big site for them. Rishi Sunak just, proclaimed the United Kingdom as being an AI headquarters for the world. So it's a good thing to see Palantir establishing their roots there.
Louis, there has been quite a lot of pushback, right, for some of the contracts that you've been trying to get for NHS, and doctors being worried that it's a private company managing some of the infrastructure and what you do with the data. What kind of assurances would you give today to people working in services that are worried about how their data is used?
So I think those are very legitimate concerns. Anything that touches patient data in the NHS needs a lot of scrutiny. But I think a lot of the concern around us specifically stems from a misunderstanding about our business model. We are not interested in the economic sense in the NHS's data. We're interested in their business. Unlike other tech companies, we don't monetize data. Our business model is licensing our software to help large, complex organizations to make better use of the data they already lawfully control.
Now, Lewis Mosley was supposed to debate Corey Crider, who's head of Foxglove. Foxglove is a organization in the United Kingdom that basically spreads a lot of propaganda, and their big thing is like Palantir is this evil company trying to steal your data. This is the guy that you're looking at right now that was supposed to debate her on March 15th. It was supposed to happen, and then it didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen, in my opinion, is because the NHS called Palantir, and they were like, look, we know we didn't tell you got the deal, but if you do this, you're definitely not going to get the deal. So let's just assume you got the deal, and let's just not make a big deal out of this. Because I don't think, the NHS wanted to see this one private company debate this like big media conglomerate inside of the United Kingdom and cause a lot of hoopla. At the end of the day, the way Lewis responded to that question shows me he would have demolished Corey Crider. Because what he said right there in 5 seconds is, we don't monetize the data. We do nothing with the data. And you cannot point to a business or economical use case for how we monetize the data like Facebook or Amazon that would make us money. We license our software so complex organizations have a way to utilize their data better. And that is a fundamentally different business approach. That is a different paradigm for how we think about data. And, Corey Crider and a lot of these propagandists, they just haven't been able to understand that. And so I think he would have done well in the debate, but I think they didn't do the debate because the NHS told them that you guys are probably going to get the deal, so you don't need to.
You're in the process of bidding for about a £400 million contract. I know you don't want to get into the details of that bidding process, but can you just give us a sense as to your level of confidence as to whether or not that's going to fall to Palantir? Can you give us a nod as to how you feel about that process?
I'm really sorry, Tom. I can't comment on ongoing procurement processes.
Okay.
See that smile? You see that smile? You see that? All I'm saying is I think this deal is happening, bro. I'm sorry, Tom. I can't comment on the ongoing procurement processes. That means, I'm sorry, Tom, but we've won the deal and I cannot tell you right now. Like, that's what it sounds like to me. Okay? And you know, I did debate in high school. I'm a little bit, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I understand body language decently well. I've been in thousands of debates. I had to analyze how people interact. I had to analyze how judges, respond to arguments with their body language. The way he's smiling, I mean, let's just play that again one more time, and the way he says that, it's interesting.
Sense as to your level of confidence as to whether or not that's going to fall to Palantir. Can you give us a nod as to how you feel about that process?
I'm really sorry, Tom. I can't comment on
He said, "Can you give us a nod?" And you see him like nodding a little bit to the left.
ongoing procurement processes.
You see that smile too? It's like, it's one of those, I know I'm overanalyzing it here, but it's one of those like kind of smirky, cocky smiles of just like, I can't tell you, man. Like, I wish I could tell you, but I can't tell you. You know what I mean? I can't tell you. It's not one of those, I'm scared we're not going to get the deal, therefore I don't want to talk about it. I think there's a way, or there's a sort of demeanor when you're scared or like you're not confident and you answer that question. And there's also like a overarching level of confidence, but you just can't say too much right now. And I think we got the latter from Lewis. I mean, we got a $31 million deal yesterday from the NHS. The idea that this deal doesn't happen to me is going to be ludicrous. There are no competitors for it. There is no legacy IT infrastructure companies that can do this. So when you put all the pieces together and then you look at the guy's body language and how he's smiling about it, I think the deal's getting done.
Okay, in terms of the net NHS stuff, and then we'll move on to what's happening in terms of defence. But there is this view, and you hear this from Peter Thiel, of course, one of your co-founders, saying that there's kind of a UK Stockholm syndrome around the NHS. There's been Bloomberg reporting around some emails from you talking about buying your way into the NHS. There's a view amongst some, rightly or wrongly, that Palantir is a bit of a predator. How do you kind of counteract that above and beyond what you've just said around the needs to put in place the right controls and the fact that you're not holding on to this data?
Yeah, I would counter that very firmly.
Okay.
I'm incredibly proud of the work that we have done with the NHS. Our software has enabled them to deliver PPE during the COVID crisis, to deliver the vaccinations to all of us here in the UK. And at the moment, we're helping them reduce waiting lists, which, as you know, is the major challenge that the healthcare system is facing.
Do you worry?
Pretty simple response. He's like, look, you guys can say all you want, but the results are in the pudding. If that's the analogy that makes sense. We're getting the job done. And if we're getting the job done, nothing else matters. And, you know, someone who's getting a deal from the NHS also seems like someone who could be like, I don't care what you guys are saying. We're getting the deal. We're getting results, which is why the NHS is probably going to pick us. So I really don't care about the outside noise.
About AI, I mean, some of your tech is so powerful, and this is something that we've been trying to explore, that actually, if it's in the wrong hands, it could really damage national security.
These are very legitimate concerns, and I'm very glad that the UK is taking a lead on this question. I think it's all about finding that balance between safety and innovation and experimentation. The challenge is finding that balance.
Are you talking to the Prime Minister and his team? Are you having close contact with the government about how to build out those guardrails? To what extent are they consulting you on this?
So I think the very exciting thing about the direction travel that they're taking is this non-statutory, broad cross-sectoral principles, but then the regulation itself happening in the context-specific domain. So if you take, for example, medicines, drug discovery, the application of AI there will be very different to the application of AI in, say, autonomous vehicles. So you want the individual regulatory body in that domain to take the lead.
That's a really good point. AI in drug discovery has to be fundamentally different than AI in automobiles or AI in logistics or AI in every other concerns, because there's just different guardrails you have to have if you're utilizing something so powerful as AI in different industries. So I think there should be broad sweeping regulations, but individualized applications of those regulations based on the industries. And the UK, again, seems like one of the countries that's really taking the lead on this.
But how do you know who you're selling it to and what they use it for?
Well, this is where I think it's so important to have that body of law that exists here in the UK, world-class courts, world-class regulators, and they take the lead on what's happening in their specific domain.
Talk to us. You've been really consequential in terms of your partnership with the Ukrainians in that really important defence of their nation. You're offering the services around on the battlefield, but also imagery in terms of satellite imagery, but also helping things like building out a case for war crimes and targeting the Russians on that front. Are you expanding the scope of your relationship with Ukraine? Are there more services you can offer? And do you need the financial backing of Europe, of NATO, of the US to expand that opportunity?
Okay, this is an interesting question. I haven't heard the response to this, so this is going to be mostly his response to where defense spending in Europe is going after the Ukraine war.
Well, of course, Tom, that's a very topical question today as the Ukraine Recovery Conference kicks off in London.
Yeah.
The Ukrainian Prime Minister and many senior figures from across the world are here to discuss precisely that question of how do we start to think about recovery and reconstruction in Ukraine. And, you know, I would just argue that to win a war, you need a strong economy. And so it's very important to help the Ukrainians figure out how they can, at the same time, start to rebuild transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, those prerequisites to
and you
economic
expect
recovery.
to have a role to play in that and on that front?
I would hope we will. I would very much hope we will.
Now, they do have a role. I mean, Palantir got picked to lead the digital reconstruction efforts. This was a press release that came out about 3 weeks ago. So not only are they going to be digitally managing a lot of the operations in terms of the managing the reconstruction and the efforts to actually reconstruct and all of the logistics that go with inputting the data to make sure things are happening in the right place. The example here is like when the refugee crisis was happening from Ukraine, a lot of Ukrainian refugees were leaving. So Palantir set up a system to be able to monitor which refugees were leaving from Ukraine and what other countries they were going to all throughout Europe. And UK was the United Kingdom was one of those countries. So they managed that entire operation. The way I understand the Reconstruction Act that Palantir put out the press release 3 weeks ago is they're managing the entire digital operations for how to reconstruct Ukraine. Now, inside of that, I think there's going to be individual things they do as well in terms of infrastructure and digitization and all the other stuff that Lewis is probably talking about. The fact that they set up a tech hub in Lithuania, so they're helping some of the other Baltic states to make sure that something like an invasion doesn't happen. They have their hands in Europe, and they have the support of NATO, to my understanding, and they also have the Ukrainian prime minister's ears. They have the ability to get Ukraine to give them more money to help them reconstruct. I don't know if they're getting the money yet. I don't know if the money's coming later, but I do know if their software has been pivotal to help Ukraine get to the point of reconstruction, then they probably will see the economic benefits of them helping build out Ukraine, and then the benefits of other countries wanting to get their software in case something like the Russian invasion would happen to them. So to make sure that doesn't happen to them in the future.
Is there a part of an AI tech that you think shouldn't touch an economy or defense or national security? We're still trying to figure out exactly how this changes all of our world, from how we search Google and algorithm and things like that to actually what it means for the national defense.
So I think it's a fast emerging sector, as you said. I mean, the obsolescence of what's being built is almost day by day. And in that context, I think it would be foolish to try and predict where we might be in 2 or 3 years' time.
Are there some technologies that you're developing? I mean, Alex Karp, your CEO, suggested that there's something so powerful that they wouldn't want to release them to certain customers. Are you holding back on some of the products that you've been developing? And will you be how much of a fence will you put around some of these products when you're focused on some customers? Are some customers going to be denied some of these abilities because you're concerned about how they're going to be used?
It's always been our approach from the inception of Palantir. We've had very clear red lines about who we'll work with and who we won't. So, for example, we have never worked with adversarial nations like China or Russia.
Okay.
And that will continue? I mean, I imagine that continues.
Absolutely.
How difficult is it? And again, how difficult is it to actually track who it sells to? Like, if you sell technology to a friendly nation, but then this goes elsewhere, I mean, can you actually track it?
Yes.
How do you track it?
Well, we track who's using our software, where it's being used. So there's a technological dimension, there's a contractual dimension.
Back to the defence part, NATO has its own venture capital fund it's setting up, so it's going to be investing in some key technologies. Are you working with NATO directly? Are you expecting to get further contracts from NATO? And what does the spending in Europe, the ramped up defence spending, mean for your prospects in Europe?
Well, I think we've been in Ukraine, as you know, for the last 18 months, and I think that's opened the eyes, not just of Europe, but the wider world, to where there might be gaps in military capability. People have seen what works on the battlefield and what doesn't, and clearly that has opened a great deal of opportunity for us around the world.
I mean, does that mean that policymakers in Berlin and elsewhere kind of tapping you on the shoulder saying, maybe it's about time we worked with you at a deeper level if we're not already? Are you getting that sense?
We are, yes.
OK, so contracts are going to be coming from Europe as a result of this?
I don't want to make any predictions, but the conversation's alive.
That is big news at the end. Obviously, he can't say if they're actually going to be able to get any contracts, right? Like, it's a public company. They're not allowed to make those arguments, but that's big. And I didn't see that at the end. It's just out of focus. Here we go. I didn't see that at the end of the video that I watched today on the Morning Open, but that's a really big deal. So the last question, I think that's the most important question, to be honest, out of this whole interview, was, you've been in Ukraine for 18 months. Have you seen NATO or countries surrounding NATO, in NATO, tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, it's about time we start working with you? His response to that question was yes, a plain yes, which is really exciting to me. And it's really exciting primarily because of the fact that that's what we've been speculating for a very long time. And it's like, you're putting two and two together as an analyst, as a retail investor, like, well, if Ukraine is using them and the software is being used correctly, and what Lewis said was, you've seen the effect of our software on the battlefield for the past 18 months, which is why we're seeing some interest. And then NATO's setting up a venture capital fund, which is basically, billions of dollars they're going to have to invest in emerging technologies. I mean, outside of investing in some crappy startups, which is usually what venture capital funds have to do, right? A lot of them lose money. Why wouldn't you take some of that money and invest in something that's proven, that has literally been the reason for why Ukraine has had a fighting chance, versus some random other AI startup? It's like, no, you're gonna give it to Palantir. It's like that's what's gonna happen. The money's gonna go to Palantir. Those contracts are gonna come in, and Lewis seems to have confirmed that. Obviously, he can't confirm a reacceleration of growth in governmental contracts because that's like insider information, right? You can't disclose that on the earnings call. They might say something like that. But if he's saying they are seeing increased adaptation and just interest, brand awareness from these countries that are dealing with defense issues because they've increased defense spending in Europe, given what has happened with Ukraine, and they're tapping them on the shoulder saying, hey, maybe it's time we start working with you, that's a big deal to me. Now, international CAGR on the commercial side for Palantir is about 10%. It's not good in commercial. On the governmental side, it's better, but it's not like massive, right? The UK Ministry of Defense gave them $91 million like in September. Outside of that, we got a Lithuania deal. We got some Ukraine stuff. I don't know what those deals are worth. I don't know if, they're just free, if they're just like random PRs and they're not really worth anything from a money perspective. But I do know, and I think all retail investors do believe, that if we're working in Ukraine, there's a ton of other countries in the Baltic states and overall in NATO that are going to want to use their software. CodeStrap came on this podcast a couple months ago, or a year ago now, May 2022. If you just type in YouTube, NATO will be begging for Palantir, there's a 6-minute clip of him saying NATO will be begging for Palantir. And his whole entire logic for why the governmental business is a $100 billion TAM in and of itself is because there is no other software that can protect democracies and countries and have the type of targeting on the battlefield, etc., other than Palantir. There's just not other software companies that can do that. And if that's the case, Ukraine was the perfect case study for Palantir to showcase their software. And then a reacceleration of governmental spending in the defense space in Europe should be able to disproportionately go to Palantir, which should just mean more contracts, which should mean hopefully we can get to that 30% revenue growth target that Alex Karp and team have set. All right, that's it for me. Thanks so much for listening and watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. This was Lewis Mosley, head of the UK for Palantir, speaking on the potential NHS deal, increased governmental spending in Europe for defense, and ultimately what the trajectory is for Palantir in Europe. Thanks so much for listening and watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.